Hello, it is Tuesday, April 27th, 2021. This is the Inclusive Naming Initiatives Language Workstream, and it's about 11:32 PST on the Pacific Coast. The link to the agenda is in the chat. Julian, you've just added your name to the template rather than the April 27th instance of the notes. It happens all the time. I just want you to put your name in the right place. So don't worry too much about it and move your name down.
The usual trick.
The usual trick, yeah. I mean, to be fair, I do it too. So it's surprisingly hard not to.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of things on the run today. And so I'm just going to dive right into it if we don't mind. So I'm going to do a quick run through of our project board. You can see the link there in the agenda. With the caveat that I know that there are some things, for example, the work that Joanna's been doing, which are like a longer discussion at this point. So, so we're going to do like a really high level overview on this one, okay? So we have a to-do to define the recommendation format. This is issue number 22. And I've added a note in the agenda, which I forget whom volunteered to take this on last time, Julian, I believe. I had a to-do to help Julian out and create an empty markdown file for them so that they could then populate it with the actual recommendations. Julian, that is ready for you. The link is right there, so you can hit the edit button on GitHub and upload our recommendation format, and then we can call this one done.
Thank you. I will be glad to take a look and follow that action. Thank you for letting me know.
And I'm working on the assumption that you do know Markdown. So if you don't, please let me know.
Let me give it a go, and if I need some help, I'll give you a shout.
Okay. Yeah, it's basically Markdown takes like a plain text editor and it provides it like a bit of formatting. You can look up Markdown syntax on Google and find tons of helpful guides to do what you need to do. But you can also send me a DM or a message. I will try my best to be responsive. It is the week before KubeCon, which is a very large event for my employer. So we're all doing our best. We're just going to put that right out there. Okay. Now where did I go with that? Okay. So that's number 22. So number 23 and number 24. This is Joanna's excellent work on the principles documentation. I've given you an initial review, Joanna, but per our discussion last week, we wanted to make sure that the sort of evaluation framework that we were using and the principles documentation were in strong alignment. Let's save that for the open discussion because I think there's more to say there. You okay?
Okay. Sure. I do want to just on the criteria for evaluating terms, I do just want to talk about like what's the right process. There's great commentary and feedback in the draft, and let me post the link to that in chat so everyone has it. There's great feedback, and I'm not sure. I'm happy to go through the comments and incorporate the ones that I think are where there's consensus on, or where it just makes sense, and I don't think it's going to be controversial. If people are okay with me doing that, I'm happy to volunteer for that. And then there are still some where there's not yet consensus on how we want to deal with it. Mm-hmm. And my question is, do we want to like schedule a separate working session for that? Like, how do we want to resolve the comments where there's not clear consensus?
That is a question I was actually going to ask you later on. So thank you for bringing it up, which is, would you like to have a separate working session on it? Because I think I think our principles merit a bit more documentation or a bit more discussion that we're going to be able to give it in the half hour that we have here. And I think that's okay. It changes a doodle that I had just created, but we can talk about that later too.
I think that would be great. So I think my proposal is maybe at the end of this week, I will go ahead and incorporate any feedback that is not controversial, that I don't expect anybody is going to object to. So I can do
Okay.
that work. And I'll leave in commentary regarding the issues that I think are still open. And then it would be great if maybe sometime next week or the following week, we could schedule a working session to talk about the issues that are still open.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. If we can, let's try and do it between now and next week. And this is a purely selfish request, which is we are planning to do something for inclusive naming around KubeCon, and we would sort of like to be able to show something for our work. But honestly, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. I don't want anybody to feel pressured or feel like they need to like pull an all-nighter or do anything like that. If it doesn't happen, we'll just have an open meeting and that'll be it. Let's see what we can do. I guess is my answer to that question.
I'm happy. Yeah, I'm happy to meet later this week. Thursday or Friday are both pretty open for me.
Yeah. Okay. So the other sort of half of that conversation was around how do we start aligning our existing evaluation framework to the principles that we now have, because they should be kind of in lockstep, right? So I took an early stab at that this morning, and I'll just sort of walk through it with y'all. What I think, sort of reading through Joanna's recommendations for principles, but I think the direction that I think we can go in with this is effectively to sort of bucket categories of our principles. For example, there's categories that really have to do with like personal identity. And there's categories that have to do with just violence in the language in general. And there are 2-3 principles around either of those. And I think the way to sort of line those up is to figure out like, what are those categories that we're aiming at? And then how can we sort of structure an evaluation rubric based on those broader categories? So I revised what I created a while back with the, and maybe I'll open up like the preview because it's a little easier to read.
Celeste, I have a high level question about this. Do we want to go through the exercise of aligning these? I mean, is there a value to having a separate evaluation framework versus the criteria that are under discussion? Or does it make sense to combine them and just have one document? Because it seems like they have similar purposes.
That's kind of, honestly, Joanna, I wonder if you and I need to have a separate conversation before we come back to the larger group about that.
Just my vote, just real quick, my vote. There's a lot of overlap between these two concepts. One seems more concrete in sort of a decision tree, and the other one seems more sort of broader brush in terms of trying to understand the underlying principles that might define that decision tree, but they definitely seem highly related.
Yeah.
And this is Michelle. I mean, I would say I feel like the principles are sort of like a vision statement. They're your high level, what it is. And then the framework gets down into more specifics. So it could be that you have one document and your principles are at the top. They're sort of the about the overview, the introduction to it, but it's fine if they're separate.
Yeah. Before we move forward, Joanna, do you and I want to book something for maybe Thursday or Friday and see what happens if we combine these two documents? Because I get what you're getting at. And I think I think my initial idea was like, can we edit your document down and then sort of like, again, align this existing document? But I wonder if you're right, and I wonder if combining them is the correct move. But I think you and I need to be in the same room to do that, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, if they serve different purposes, then, then if there are two separate goals we're trying to achieve with these different documents, I'm all for keeping them separate and then just making sure they're sort of in their lanes. But if they're serving the same purpose, yeah. Well, anyway, we can talk about that more. I'll message you on to find a time.
Yes, please. That
There's
would be
one
helpful.
thing, I think you might want to consider is when we're in the language work stream, so we might think that they work in lockstep together. It could be the same document, but you might check with some of the other groups, especially like on the Monday meeting, to see like, is there something different that, the marketing group or whatever would be doing with the principals, that maybe they're aligning what they're doing with the principals, which is not the same as the language framework. So the principles might apply to everything and not just to evaluating the INA language.
Yeah. What do you think, Joanna?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that I think it's good to have broader feedback. Do we want to? I mean, all the other probably aren't quite as. I'm not sure how well they've. I guess I'm not sure how closely they've been like reviewing the two documents, and if we just ask them casually on Slack if they would have sort of a well-formed opinion. But I mean, I certainly have no objection to asking about that. A different way of framing that question is, what goals do you see like an evaluation criteria or principles document serving? And I guess making a decision based on a response to that question.
Yeah, I'm gonna say, let's you and I have a conversation. I think let's you and I meet up later this week if we can, and see if it makes sense to combine these two documents. And then I think, regardless of how our outcome of combining these two documents goes, I want to ask at the general meeting as well, I think. I want to see what people's sense is. Okay. So this is still a little up in the air. That's cool. All right, so gather initial recommendations from participating member companies and reconcile. We've had a spreadsheet out for a few weeks now. We have, I think, about 100 lines worth of recommendations to parse through. We have a recommendation format. We just sort of need to put it on GitHub and sort of stamp it off. There's, I think, a bit of risk involved in that our principles and evaluation framework are still a little bit up in the air, but I want to say that both of those are, first off, I think the existing evaluation framework can provide enough structure to go through these. And second off, I think the principles, there's a lot of discussion on Joanna's document, but I still get the sense that we are more or less in accordance there. So what I would like to do is, if we can sometime either this week or early next week, let's schedule a longer working session to go through this spreadsheet and see what we came back with, see what consensus we can drive, and see if we can't sort of draft some formal recommendations. Is that reasonable?
Definitely.
Okay. I have a doodle poll then that I will ask you all to fill out. I decided to be ambitious. It's down here in the open discussion, by the way. I decided to be ambitious and try for a 2-hour time slot, which I realize is probably not a good idea. So if you can only make a part of it, that's totally okay. If if the availability is too soon, because I booked it for sort of like later, I gave options for like later this week and early next week. If that availability is not going to work, that's also okay. I figured I would be ambitious and try my best to get this done sooner rather than later, but it's short notice. So blame me, don't blame yourselves. Let's do what we can. If none of the options are working for you, yell at me in Slack and say, Celeste, these are totally unreasonable. Don't do this. And then what I think we'll do is sort of, we're going to go through the spreadsheet. I think we need to talk about it and see what emerges. I'm going to spend a bit of time earlier this week, just like pre-combing through the spreadsheet to provide a bit more structure to this time, so I don't waste everybody's time.
Celeste,
yeah.
is it fair to say that maybe you're looking at just sort of having a trial run through of this with what we have in hand and just see, sort of see what happens? Maybe the wheels blow off, but maybe they don't.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Honestly, I think we're going to come back with a consensus-based decision on master slave and blacklist whitelist. From I took a look at the spreadsheet a few days ago, and I will find it in my tangle of Google Drives. So excuse the mess. Excuse the mess, everybody. I think we're going to come back with a few other consensus-based recommendations that I was not, I suppose, broadly predicting. Like we've got a lot on man-made and manpower. We don't necessarily have consensus on the replacement term, but yeah, I think we're going to come back with something. I'm pretty confident we're going to come back with something, actually. However, this is my first time sorting through this particular kind of data. My plan is kind of just to go for it. So if anybody has a better plan, I am all ears.
It's a lot to get through. Certainly sorting by term is the way to start, and just identify duplicates, identify things that need to be discussed. We'll get through it. We can do this.
Well, even that process, it would help to, whatever process is taken there, it would help to sort of say, well, this is how we decided to prioritize. If we only have an hour on this, we decided to prioritize this way, and why. I think it's useful to capture that. Capture
so,
thought processes.
I think broadly speaking, what I'm thinking is, as Carla suggested, let's sort by term. And then let's see what terms pop up more than once. And I think for every term that pops up more than once, if we can kind of have a point person or an owner for that, and then say like, okay, Carla's going to own master, Mark's going to own slave, or like maybe it makes sense to pair those because they are so often paired. And then I really think it's about like looking at what the replacement terms come back at, seeing what other notes people left us. Like if they have like more justification behind that, if they have research behind that. And then I think it's attempting to walk through our evaluation framework and our principles and see where does it violate those principles. With the understanding of the drafts.
Yeah, one useful thing is the principles, the framework sets out first order concerns. And it seems to me that's a good bunch to start with. Like just go through and identify the ones that are first order, and let's hit those.
Yeah, I think that's actually thank you so much for your thoughtfulness for guiding me in this. I actually, kind of identify what our high priorities are. And then again, I think it's walking it through the evaluation framework and saying like, okay, these are definitely red flags. And then I think it's trying to draft a recommendation based on what we've decided our template is.
So Celeste, real quick though, if viewing it as a trial, I think that makes a lot of sense because it allows us to kind of exercise some of the processes and some of the criteria and so forth. If the and at the end of that, is the recommendations just sort of a set of trial recommendations, or is there something broader here where the entire membership of the INI needs to effectively, vote on
Ooh.
I guess my thinking is, do other people on other teams feel that there is that they have a part in the decision-making process for this part of the whole thing, or are they all sort of signed off and delegating that to the language group?
They didn't join the language work stream.
That's kind of how I feel.
Yeah.
I know. I
Also,
can tell
just so you
yeah.
understand, that was not my understanding. When I signed up for this work stream, is because I was interested in it, but it did not occur to me that if I had signed up for another one, I was sort of signing off on just
Yeah.
delegating what the language work stream was doing, and it may not be clear to others
that is a really good question. I think that's a question for the leads to answer amongst themselves. What I can tell you is for the open source work stream, their understanding is that they're taking what we produce. Because the open source, like one of the things the open source workstream is hoping to do is to take those recommendations and maintain them in a machine readable format, so that other tools can then use that as a data source. So that particular workstream, I think, has an explicit understanding that they're not going to produce those language recommendations. And I think that makes a lot of sense for them. The marketing work stream is kind of its own thing. But I do think that is a good question for some of the other work streams, and I think it's worth asking. So thank you for bringing it up.
I'm uncomfortable with the idea of a vote, but once we get things to a point where we feel really good about them, we could say, hey, does the whole membership want to have a look and provide comments?
Yeah. What I really think would be an interesting outcome of this exercise is we produce effectively a set of first drafts, and then we have an open comment period. With the an open comment period asterisk, I think with the understanding that we do have a bit of authority to make the final decision on what comments we do and don't accept, because you're going to get divergent opinions. And some, like, I think, as Joanna has discovered, and as is very much the nature of working in open and sort of having open comment periods in general, the advantage of doing things on the internet and open is that you get a lot of comments and you get a lot of feedback, and that's very helpful. The disadvantage is that people can sort of like say, this is my opinion, here is my comment, and then walk away forever, refuse to compromise. And there's no mechanism, or there are limited mechanisms by which you can attempt to acquire compromise from them. So yeah, I think that's what I would say there is, like, it's a limited comment period, but we still need to maintain a bit of decision-making power.
We don't want, sorry, I was going to say, we don't want Bodie McBoatface for all of our terms.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want Bodie McBoatface, first off, and second off, it'll go forever.
Yeah, no, when I use the word voting, I just threw that out there as a way that typically I see a lot of, well, not a lot, but in certain projects, consensus reached on whether or not certain features will be added to certain pieces of software. But I didn't mean to suggest that that's going to be our process. I just thought I'd ask the question.
Okay. Okay. So please fill out this doodle poll, and I will schedule something based on people's availabilities. I will also post the doodle in the chat just to catch people who weren't at this particular meeting. Joanna, you and I, let's schedule something for later this week, and let's have I think we'll both benefit from a face-to-face chat on this. Julian, if you need help with Markdown, you know where to find me. Looking forward to working with all of you, and I guess that's the meeting.
Real quick, I didn't understand the qualification first order term. I guess maybe I didn't read Joanna's document close enough, but I don't recall seeing that.
Oh, no, that's what's, I will provide you a link.
The excellent framework.
This is. There you go. This is where we started with kind of what we developed with the Kubernetes working group. But I think now that we're working with the bigger group, and this group has slightly different goals than what we were trying to accomplish with Kubernetes,